Welcome back, everyone. So finally, it comes to step 10, which is the harder part, where we need to use while loops and the function we just defined above in order to actually run the game. So let's write out a little bit of logic and comments on the steps we need to take. So first off, we're going to need some sort of while loop to keep running the game. And then probably at the bottom of this while loop somewhere, we're going to break out of the while loop on the replay function. So remember, the replay function just asks if they want to play again. So if they don't want to play again, we'll break out of this while loop that continually runs the game. So let's do that right now. At the very top, we'll just print welcome to tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe. And then we'll say while true. And then we're going to play the game here. And finally, somewhere at the very bottom, we'll ask for the actual result of that replay. So we'll say if not replay, break. Because after they've played the game and somebody's won or there's been a tie, we're going to ask them, we're going to call replay and then break out of this continuous while true loop. Again, you should always be very careful with these true loops. There should always be a way to break out of them. Now it's time to play the game. So in order to play the game, we first need to set everything up. And what I mean by that is like the board, who's first. And then the other thing we probably need to set up is what markers they choose. So we'll say choose markers. So those are X's and O's. Okay, so we need to set those things up. And then after that, we'll have some sort of actual gameplay. And the gameplay will probably consist of player 1 turn, and then player 2 turn. So let's start off by setting everything up. The first thing we want to set up is the board. This should be pretty straightforward. We'll just set up a board, and in my case, I'm going to set up the board as a bunch of empty strings because when I set up the display board function up above, I expect it to be kind of a bunch of empty strings there. There's lots of different ways to do this, and it really depends on how you set up your display board function. But in this case, I'm going to set up my board as just a list of 10 empty strings. And I will say that player 1 marker, comma, player 2 marker are going to be the result of player underscore input. So if we scroll back up to realize what player input was, remember that's one of the very first functions you actually created, which asked what player chose X or O. So we're going to say player 1 marker is equal to X, and then player 2 is equal to O, or the opposite, because we're using tuple unpacking here. So that's what we're running, that very first player input function. So we're calling that all the way at the bottom, and I set their actual markers. That way I can call those variables later on. Then we need to choose who goes first. So I'm going to say turn is equal to the function call, choose first. Remember that was basically that coin flip function. And then let's print out a little report. We'll say turn will go first. So here, if we remember what turn is, choose first actually literally returns just a string, player 1 or player 2. So we're going to use that as the indicator of who's going first. So we say turn choose first, player 1 or player 2 will go first because turn is the actual string. So we concatenate it. And then finally, once this is ready to go, let's ask if they're ready to play the game. So we'll create a variable called play game, and the input will be want to play. I should say ready to play, really, because we already have a bunch of stuff. Ready to play. So they've set up the players, we decided who's going to go first, and we asked them, are you ready to play? And we'll have them say lowercase y or n. And it's up to you how you want to do this. We'll say if play game is equal to y, then the game is on. So I'm going to create a variable called game on and set it equal to true. If for some reason they weren't ready to play yet, we'll just say game on is equal to false, and that will be it. Okay, so now it's time for the gameplay. We'll assume that game on is true, and then we'll say while game is on. So we have player 1 turn. So let's say if turn is equal to the string player 1, we'll have player's 1 actual turn, and otherwise we'll have player 2 turn. So off of this we'll say else and this is player 2 turn. Okay, so let's set up the logic on player 1's turn. So what do we actually need to do here? Well, the first thing we want to do is display the board. Otherwise, the player won't know what the heck they're looking at. So we'll say display board, and we'll pass in that board object that we just created. And the next thing we do is, well, let's write out the steps here. We'll show the board. Once the player's seen the board, they can choose a position. Once they've done that, we will place the marker on the position that they chose. And then we just need to check if they won or check if there is a tie. And then finally, no tie and no win. Then next player's turn. So that's the logic of what we're going to do here. And this entire logic is going to be the exact same thing for player 1 and player 2. We're just going to edit the actual variable names. So we showed the board. That's easy. That's the display board function we defined earlier. Now we want to choose a position. That's also pretty straightforward because we actually already have a position function called player choice. So remember that if we call back player choice, and let's make sure we've defined it up here. So player choice was just this one right here where we have them choose an actual position on the map, or I should say on the board. We say position is equal to player choice, and we pass in the board here. And then finally, we're going to call the place marker function, where we take in the current board. We say player 1 marker because this is the player 1 turn, and then we pass in the position they chose, which is defined up here. So we showed the board, we choose a position, we place the marker on the position, and now we need to check if they won. Again, we already defined the function for that. It was called win check, and it takes in the board, and then that player's marker. In our case, it's going to be player 1 marker. And we can display the board. So if win check happens to be true, then player 1 has won. So in that case, we'll display the board and print out player 1 has won. And once somebody's going to win the game, we'll just say game on is now equal to false. So the game is no longer active, which will break out of this while loop. We'll still have this while loop right here asking people if they want to play again, but this while loop of the actual gameplay will now be broken when we say the game has been won. So if we don't have a win, then this doesn't execute, which means we should check if there's a tie. So how do we check if there's a tie? Well, we can check if there's a tie if the board is full. So if we've already checked and nobody's won, then we should check if the board is full. And if the board is full and nobody's won, then that means we have a tie. So we already actually have a full board check, and let's check it up over here. Remember over here we have the full board check function, so we're going to be using that, and returns back the Boolean, true or false. So we'll say if full board check on the current board that we're kind of passing around here, we'll display the board. So this means that someone hasn't won, and else if the board is full, we'll display the board and then we'll say something like the game's a tie. So tie game, and then we will break out of the loop. We could also set game on equal to false, either way. And then we can set turn equal to player 2. So let's actually just keep this game on convention. So instead of breaking, we'll say game on is equal to false. So what's actually happening here? For player's 1 turn, we display the board, we choose a position, or player 1 chooses a position. We put that marker on the board. We check if they've won. If they did win, game on is now equal to false, and this entire while loop is over. If they never won, then we have two things to do. We need to check if the board is full. And if the board is full, then it's a tie game. We print out the board, show them what it looks like that is full, and we say game on is equal to false, and this entire while loop is over. Otherwise, nobody's won. There's still space on the board to go. That means it's time for player 2 to go. And we're going to essentially copy and paste all this code because player 2 is going to do a really similar thing. It's just wherever player 1 is, player 2 is going to be, and vice versa. So let's delete these comments here. And now we have this else statement. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see the entire logic here. Notice how I have if turn is equal to player 1. That's this entire block of code. Else is now lined up with this if. So else here signifies that this player's 2 turn. And I'm going to paste all the code here. So same thing, I need to show the board. I need to choose a position. I need to place the marker, except this time it's going to be the player 2 marker. So that's a change we're making. And then we want to win check for, again, the player 2 marker. And we display the board. And in this case, player 2 would have won. We set game on equal to false. Else, we say if full board check, display the board, tie game. And finally, if player 2 didn't win and there's no tie, then we go back to turn being player 1. And that's it. That's player 2's turn. And let's check this out and see if it actually worked. We'll run this code. We'll choose X for player 1. We'll say ready to play. Yes. Choose a position 1. And let's kind of play this out. We'll keep going like this. And then we should see player X win. So player 1 has won. Perfect. And let's go ahead and play again. Okay, so we just saw how the win works. Now let's run this again and check to make sure that our tie checking is also working. So I'm going to type in O. So player 1 is going to be O. Player 2 will go first. So that means X is going to go first. We're ready to play. Time to choose a position. And hopefully I can actually get a tie here. This is harder than it looks to play against yourself and try to purposefully tie. But I will do my best here. Let's say 2. Let's say 4. And now O is going to block him at position 7. And then X will have him go, let's say, position in the middle, 5. We'll have O block him at position 9. And then X will have him go kind of somewhere useless, let's say 3. And then O will purposefully block off X here. And we'll have him go at position 6. And then finally, we'll have X go in at position 8. And it's a tie game, so the tie check worked as well. And we no longer need to play again, so we'll say no. And that's it. That's the game. All right, so definitely a really big project, but hopefully now that you're on the other end of it, you were able to see how you can use functions to create a larger block of code. Now, if you were treating this as a code-along project, what I would highly suggest is if you just viewed the entire solutions, go back and see if you can now go through the workbook notebook on your own after you've referenced this entire solutions code. It's going to be a really great help to your skills to be able to try to attempt this independently, even if you already watched the solutions lecture. All right, thanks everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to post to the Q&A forums, and I will be there to help you out. I'll see you at the next lecture.